Secretary, I understand you just got back from a trip to Syria and Lebanon. What were your initial impressions, and just kind of give us the lay of the land?
Yes, I was in Beirut, in Damascus, and in Homs this week. And essentially, you see two countries which had good 2025s. In Syria, they got rid of a hated regime. In Lebanon, they established a new and credible government. But 2026 and the Iran war threatens to suck them back into a vortex of conflict and destabilization. Lebanon, you mentioned rightly, 1 in 5 of the population now being driven from their homes. A country of just 5 to 6 million people, already 1 million refugees from Syria. So this is a country that's really on the edge, and the scale of need is really monumental. If I just tell you that the poorest citizens in Lebanon are being given about a quarter of what they need to survive as a family of 5 for a month, you can see the kind of pressure, the pressure cooker, in fact, that exists in the country.
There's a fascinating story on the Bloomberg terminal about how Israel's war is pitting a country against itself. David, the ongoing war is driving apart communities because of the rift between Israel and Hezbollah. What can you tell us about that?
That's a really good point, Joe. What I would say is that there are a lot of people angry with almost everyone who is present in the country and on the conflict. So there's a lot of anger towards Hezbollah, which fired rockets at Israel after the killing of the Iranian supreme leader. Obviously, Iran sponsors Hezbollah. So there's anger towards Hezbollah for dragging Lebanon into someone else's war. There's anger, too, towards Israel, which now occupies significant swathes of southern Lebanon. You'll remember that that's happened before, between 1982 and 2000. It was disastrous for Lebanon, disastrous for Israel, too. There's anger towards the government because people want them to have the government to have more agency, more leadership. And there's enormous anger towards the international community, including the United States, for starting a war just as Lebanon was getting back on its feet, and significantly for cutting the aid budget. Because just as needs are rising, we're having to lay off our own staff in Lebanon. We have 100 International Rescue Committee staff in Lebanon rather than 200. So the most basic humanitarian needs are just not being met.
What is the relationship between the Lebanese population and Hezbollah? I remember I was there at the start of the Syrian war and went into the Bekaa Valley and some of these strongholds. And at the time when you drove around there were big banners of, the Iranian leadership, of IRGC leadership. I don't think those are there anymore. And then earlier this year, you had this kind of striking moment where the Lebanese government kind of officially banned Hezbollah's independent military activities. They spoke out against Hezbollah. Has that had any kind of effect on the governing body and popular sentiment for Hezbollah in that country?
Well, there are different communities in Lebanon, and they have different allegiances.
Of course.
The banners that you saw in the north of the Bekaa Valley, they're still there. There are communities who feel they have no option but to support Hezbollah. That's the Shia communities, because the governments historically and the other communities have not given them enough of a stake in the system. And I think it's very important to recognize that the government that came in last year, determined to make a new offer to all communities in Lebanon. That was the key. It's a government led by Prime Minister, former World Bank official. The system continues to offer different places in the political system to different communities. But you can't say there's one attitude of the Lebanese population to any of these actors. It's a country that has many different denominations, many different factions and elements. And the critical question is whether the center can hold. And what you were pointing to, I think, in your question is that with 1 million Syrians, in the main, the Shia population, pushed into other parts of the country, the great danger is that tension rises again in Christian, in Sunni, in Druze communities.
Interesting. So what happens to these communities in the south that have essentially emptied out? Israel says it plans to seize control of territory south of the Litani River, and we have seen a mass exodus in that area. What will happen to those villages?
Well, that question is exactly what I'm being asked by Lebanese people I met last Wednesday in Beirut. They say to me, I'll tell you, the wife of a baker said, look, we had a bakery on the Lebanon-Israel border. It got bombed in November 2024. We moved to Tyre on the Mediterranean coast. We set up a new bakery. We've now had to leave that again. There's stories over the weekend of Tyre being bombed. And what that lady said to me, she said, look, what is my future? I can't go back, but I can't go forward. She's in a government shelter at the moment. About 15% of the total million people displaced are in government shelters. And when I say shelter, that's an old school. So kids are kicked out of school so that people have got somewhere to live. So that's what I mean by the vortex of conflict and instability. And that woman was saying to me, I don't know if I have a future in Lebanon. And I'm afraid there's no good answer to that question at the moment. The Israeli government have said that, I mean, in a chilling phrase, they've said that some towns are going to be raised in the Gaza style. So obviously that is heard in Lebanon. There's talk of occupation. The emergency coordinator for the United Nations said the danger is that the southern Lebanon gets added to the list of occupied territories. And there's no good answer at the moment. And that's why those of us who know that Lebanon and its stability are an important part of the mosaic of the Middle East, that's why we're worried.
I do also, we want to ask you about Iran more broadly, but first I do also want to ask you about your impressions of Syria, because, I mean, the fact that you were able to go to Damascus and Homs still startles me as someone who covered that war for so long. I mean, I was in field hospitals in Lebanon interviewing people who'd been struck with bullets fleeing homes, mothers, children. I think it's promising that you're able to go there safely, but how is al-Shura, how is that new Syrian government going, especially in light of what's happening in Iran? Do you think this is putting undue pressure on a very nascent government there?
Well, it's a very good point. The government is under extraordinary pressure. When you cross the Jordan-Syria border, the Syrian by the way, you can hear the air raid sirens on the Jordanian side as you reach the border. When I got to the border, there's a big sign which says, take a selfie here, welcome to the new Syria. So there's a determined attempt by the government to say that there's change in the air. I was there last May, just after 5 months after President Sharar took over. I met clients, but I also had the chance to meet him. He said, I need this to be a Syria for all Syrians, but I need month-by-month progress. And the crisis that they face is between expectations and reality. Expectations are still high, but the reality on the ground is a very slow progress. And the great danger is that the money that was promised for Syria by the Gulf countries is now going to have to be spent in the Gulf on defense, on resilience. And Syrians and the Syrian government are worried about where they fit in, given the pressures that they face. They've got a war in Iran to their east. They've got a war in Lebanon to their west. They don't want to get squeezed.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, David, where does this leave rescue workers, something that you know a lot about, peacekeepers, people who are actually bringing resources to those in need? We saw 2 Indonesian peacekeepers from the UN interim force in Lebanon killed by a roadside bomb last week. 2 others were injured. Could we get to the point where help cannot get to where it's going?
Well, we've already reached that point in some parts of the world. It's never been more dangerous to be a civilian or to be an aid worker. More civilians were killed in conflict in 2025 than soldiers were killed. 100,000 or so civilians were killed, according to independent estimates, and 640 aid workers were killed as well. Now, obviously, that work that is absolutely essential to keep not just body and soul together for people who are in need, but frankly also as a mitigation of destabilization. I mean, if you don't treat humanitarian need, then you store up trouble. And that's the great danger at the moment, because we face this scissors effect, if you like. On the one hand, needs are high and rising, in some ways becoming more complex. At the same time, the aid budget has been more or less halved. I mean, there couldn't have been a worse time to have an Iran war, and there couldn't be a worse time to be cutting the aid budget. And that's something that obviously is of concern to us at the International Rescue Committee. We have thousands of aid workers, locally hired staff across the Middle East, as well as across Africa and South Asia. And what we see is that scissors effect really destabilizing the communities that we're trying to serve.
There's so much conflict going on in the world right now. We were already at a point before these 2 recent conflicts where aid organizations were saying they were reaching not only the extent of what they could do, especially after the departure of USAID, but compassion fatigue even from donors. It is a holiday weekend. People are reflecting and talking about their families. You've been doing this for a while now. What is your best advice to people who feel like there's too much, they can't help, they don't know what to do? How do you fight that compassion fatigue and make a difference?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I've learned is that it's not hope that leads to action, it's action that leads to hope. And I would say to people, visit the IRC website, rescue.org, learn about what's going on, and learn about how, yes, each individual contribution may seem small, but we think we helped about 28 million people last year. That's a hell of an operation. And so this idea that we shouldn't care because there's nothing that can be done, I would turn it around. There's something that can be done, and surely we care enough. The world has more resources to do more good than at any time in human history, and woe betide us if we don't make the most of it.